start with the attitudes towards women. Unfortunately, attitudes towards women, generally speaking, throughout history, if we take literature, politics, the media, the attitudes are mostly negative. So these are some examples of how negative these attitudes can be. Some examples from literature. Take the most, let's say, well-known work in English literature, Hamlet by William Shakespeare. Hamlet says, frailty, thy name is woman. Of course, frailty means weakness. He is talking to, of course, he was talking to Ophelia, his sweetheart, and he's disappointed in her because she's been used as a puppet in order to know the reason why Hamlet is behaving in this way, to just get out some secrets out of him. And he's disappointed in her for this reason, because she's working against him. And he's already been disappointed in his mother because she remarried after his father's death. So his disappointment in his mother, his disappointment in Ophelia, led him to make this generalization about women. So he says, the other name for woman is weakness. Frailty, weakness, is the other name for woman. This shows you a very negative attitude towards women. Here's another example from another writer, Oscar Wilde. He says, women are meant to be loved, not to be understood. So no matter how hard you try, you can never understand a woman. But you can love a woman, but you cannot understand her. This is another example of how women are belittled. Thomas More says, woe men. The word woman comes from woe man. So woe means grief, sorrow, sadness. What he's trying to say is that women are the source of grief for men. They are the cause of sorrow for men. This is another negative attitude. Alan Pease, interestingly, is a body language expert who once wrote a book called the title of the book is What Men Know About Women. And if you open the book, it's all blank pages. It's an empty book. There's nothing in it. It's just the title, the cover. What men know about women. In other words, men know nothing about women. It's a blank book. If you compare the number of writings that praise women to the number of writings that blame women, you will find that that negative comments on women outnumber positive comments. And this is also not fair. It means it's a man's world. It's not a woman's world. Women are not given their place, their proper appreciation in writing. Here's another example from American history, the Salem witch trials. During the 17th century, many women in America were accused of being witches. Notice, many women were accused of being witches, not men. And some of them were burned at the stake, hanged, killed, murdered, because they were thought to be witches. And this is especially true in North America and in New England, particularly Boston and Massachusetts, and especially in the town of Salem. And this is also a very, good example of how women have been mistreated throughout history. The story of the chord keyboard is also interesting to show you how men are biased towards women. When the first typewriters were invented, and you remember the first, in the pre-computer age, before computers were invented, people used manual, those mechanical, do you remember those mechanical manual typewriters? The letter keys were originally ordered alphabetically from A to Z. So it goes like this. This is an example of the layout of those keypads on those old mechanical typewriters. And it makes sense. It's logical to arrange the letters alphabetically. And managers bought these typewriters for their secretaries, asking them to type reports, etc. And managers were men, secretaries were women. So managers bought these typewriters with the alphabetical keyboard, and the secretaries were very happy with it. And they soon learned how to type very fast. So they started finishing their reports very fast, faster than handwriting them, of course. The problem was that these secretaries finished their work in the office very soon, and they just went home. After finishing their work, what should they do? And they just go home. And the managers started getting very angry. So the managers didn't like the idea of their secretaries going home before them. So they said the only way to make typing difficult and slow, so the secretaries are not going to leave early, is to shuffle the keys on the keyboard. So instead of arranging them like A, B, C, D, we're going to shuffle them. And they shuffled the keys, and now we have what we call the Chord keyboard. It doesn't start with A, B, C, D. It starts with Q, W, E, R, T, which makes no sense. I mean, why did they do that? The only reason they did that is to slow down the secretaries so they would not go home early. They would stay with the managers inside the office. With the invention, and this is how typewriters started to be manufactured, with what we call the Chord keyboard, not the ABC keyboard. Even after the invention of the computers, and we have now computer keyboards, the computer keyboard inherits its layout from the old mechanical typewriters. And what this story shows is how biased the world is against women. It's just like as if the purpose of the world is to make life difficult for women. The next thing is the Trojan War. We all know the story of the Trojan War between the Greeks and the Trojans. Prince Paris, he's a Trojan prince. One day he went to the Greeks in stealth, secretly, and kidnapped Helen, Menelaus's wife. So all the Greeks, when they woke up in the morning, they couldn't find Helen. And later on, they knew that she was kidnapped by a Trojan prince. So her husband gathered an army and marched to Troy in order to bring back his wife. So there was this war between the Trojans and the Greeks. Finally, at the end of the war, the army managed to get back Helen. He was finally reunited with his wife. They killed her kidnapper, of course. Paris was killed in the war. The cause of this war is Helen. That's what historians tell you. That they say all these people who died, murdered, and lost their lives, and the problems and political problems and all that, it's all because of a woman, Helen of Troy. As Faustus says, this is the face that launched 1,000 ships. So they said that her beauty was a curse, on the Greeks and on the Trojans. But in fact, I mean, how can you blame her for it? If you think about it logically, how can you blame her for this war. I mean, she was kidnapped. She did not start the war. She was Who kidnapped her? Paris. Who raised the army? Her husband. So why don't we say if he did not kidnap her, there would be no war? Why do we say it's because of her? Why not because of her kidnapper? Or because of her husband? You know, if her husband didn't go and get her back, there would be no war. So they're not really blaming, historians don't blame the kidnapper or her husband, the men. Historians blame Helen for this. So this is another example of how history is not fair towards women. In England, during the Renaissance, women were not allowed to appear in the theater, on the stage, to be actresses. Women were not allowed to act. Only men should act. And this also shows you that women had no rights. And therefore, all the female characters in drama were played by men. Take Shakespeare, for example. All the female characters in Shakespeare's plays were performed by men. But of course, young men, because young men have that soft, high-pitched voice in order to make the character more realistic. Because it would make no sense if the audience see a female character on the stage impersonated by a man and then listen to his harsh voice, they would not feel it realistic. So that's why they selected young men, sometimes boys, to play the roles of female characters in the theater. This is a nice anecdote about King Charles II. They say one day King Charles II went to the theater to watch a play, but the play was delayed. It did not start, so he sent one of his men to the backstage to check what's going on. Why didn't they start the play? And he found out that it's because one of the men, the actors, was still shaving, didn't finish shaving, so that's why it took time for the play to begin. And the portrait of the woman you see in front of you is Margaret Hughes. She's the first English actress to appear on the stage, and this happened on December the 8th, 1660. And she played the role of Desdemona in Shakespeare's Othello. And if you come to think about it, why did they allow a woman to appear on the stage? Is it because they suddenly realized that women were deprived of their rights? Is it because suddenly they wanted at that time to give women their rights and freedom, to make them equal to men? No, in fact, the reason was because Charles II at that time was accused of homosexuality. So, to defend himself and to correct his public image, he issued this order that all female characters in plays, in drama, should be from now on, from this point on, should be played by women and not men, in order to clear his name so people would not, accuse him of homosexuality. So it was really, it was not because they wanted to give women their rights, but it's because to defend the royalty and the image of the king. Many women writers wrote under pseudonyms. They couldn't publish their books under their real names because it was considered a shame for a woman to write and publish books. So they selected pseudonyms. Take the 19th century English novelist George Eliot. George Eliot is actually no other than Mary Ann Evans. So Mary Ann Evans adopted the pseudonym of George Eliot to protect her reputation. But this is you'll say this is the 19th century. Today things are different. No, it's really the same. I mean, we're still suffering from the same. Women are still suffering from being marginalized, being considered inferior to men. Rowling, who published Harry Potter, and the first Harry Potter book, she wasn't famous at that time when she first published part one of Harry Potter. And she tried several publishers. Once she said she went on a train and started searching for a publisher who accepted her book. No publisher accepted her book, because she was a woman writer. But finally, one publisher said, "Okay, I'm going to take your book. I'll accept it, and I'm going to publish it, but on one condition." He said, "I'm not going to use your name, Joanne uh, Rowling. I'll use only the first letter of your name, the initial, J. So it's going to be J.K. Rowling, J. Rowling, not Joanne, because if your name appears on the book, if your full name, like Joanne, appears, nobody's going to buy it. They will immediately say, this is a book written by a woman. It's definitely not a good book, not worth the money we're going to pay. But if they read J.K. Rowling, J, they're not going to know it's a woman. They'll think probably it's a man, like Joseph or John or James. So that was the condition. Later on, of course, the world realized that she's a great writer. But see, this story tells you that women are still suffering, even today, from this problem. So it's not really solved, probably partially solved, but not fully solved. In the media, in movies, you have mispresentation of women also, in the form of femme fatale. The nun with the gun motif is also another example of how women have been mispresented in the media. So these are examples of how women have been treated unfairly in literature, in art, in the media, in different cultures, and mythology. And you can add to the list. You can add more examples of your own, but these are examples that show you what led to this movement, the causes of this movement. The inequality, women have often been considered as inferior and men as their superior. Marginalization of women have not been given proper attention like men. And mispresentation of women, in history, folklore, literature, politics, and the criticism lashed upon them. And history also, if you think about history, who wrote history? Women did not write history. History was written by men, not women. It reflected men's attitude towards women, and this is also not fair. And there's something you have to know. If you take a child and keep hammering the same idea into the child, take any child and keep saying every day to this child, repeat to him that you are stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid, you are lazy. This child will grow up believing that he is stupid and lazy, even if he has good intellectual powers, even if he's smart and intelligent. He will think that he's stupid. Why? Because you planted this idea into his head. You brainwashed this child. So he will not believe that he is good and clever. he will keep thinking of himself as stupid, ignorant, and lazy. Because this is the idea you've been planting, you've been hammering this idea into. So women in general have been throughout the ages bombarded with this idea, brainwashed, that you are weak, uh, you can't do this, you can't do that without men, you can't survive without men, and all that. So she came to believe this lie, that I cannot do anything without man, that I am weaker, I can't think, men are better than me. Some women, when you talk to them, they say, yes, I am weak, I'm nothing compared to men, I cannot do this, I cannot do that. They believe it, and that's the result of this brainwashing.